Buenas noches, bienvenidos al momento más profundo en la historia de los videojuegos. Vamos al video.
For the past 4 years on this channel, I have made videos on various topics, but by far the most popular form of video I have done centers on video game analysis. What I think made them so popular is that instead of being your usual video game review, I have focused primarily on narrative. Specifically, I have focused on what I believe are the best stories in the video game canon. For 20 odd years, video game narratives have been demonstrating a capacity to confuse, entice, and emotionally manipulate their audience in the most positive of ways. Most recently, in fact,
Bueno, uno puede escribir libros de un solo juego, ni hablar de toda la industria.
I have been putting forth the argument that video game narratives have demonstrated such sufficient profundity that they sometimes have matched the greatest stories told in other mediums. To continue our collective celebration of our modern-day digital mythology, I would finally like to give full attention to a game which, I would argue, has the most profound moment
Buenísimo.
in gaming history.
Buenísimo.
I refer to the final codec conversation from Metal Gear Solid 2. While I have done several videos on
Viejo, Metal Gear Solid 2 está tan adelantado a su época, los comentarios que se escuchan en el códec pueden ser perfectamente describiendo esta época.
Metal Gear Solid 2 in the past, I have never given full analytic attention to this specific moment. The main reason why is because somebody has already done so. My all-time favorite YouTube video is titled The Most Profound Moment in Gaming, MGS2 AI Conversation Analysis. Though it was released almost 9 years ago by its creator, Logo Steve, I pondered for a while how I might do a better job than he did. However, given our current cultural context, I believe I have a few other worthwhile things to contribute. The advent of subjects like fake news, the resurgence of rampant political correctness, and our tendency towards online tribalism has imbued this conversation with a much denser sense of meaning. To those who consider themselves gamers but have never played a Metal Gear Solid game, you are obligated to at least listen to this final conversation.
Exacto.
Not only will you be enlightened by its philosophical commentary, but you will be terrified by its implications, as I have been for my entire life.
Muy bueno.
Raiden, are you receiving? We're still here.
How's that possible? The AI was destroyed.
Only GW.
Who are you?
To begin with, we're not what you'd call human.
You look lost.
Over the past 200 years, a kind of consciousness formed layer by layer in the crucible of the White House. It's not unlike the way life started in the oceans 4 billion years ago. The White House was our primordial soup, a base of evolution. We are formless. We are the very discipline and morality that Americans invoke so often. How can anyone hope to eliminate us? As long as this nation exists, so will we.
Up until the end of the game, the main character Raiden believed he was receiving orders from a man named Colonel Roy Campbell, a man who was also Solid Snake's commander throughout Metal Gear Solid 1. At the end of Metal Gear Solid 2, Raiden learned that his colonel was in fact an artificial intelligence, manipulating Raiden.
Y es interesante porque tú recibes misiones de ese personaje y uno está viviendo completamente la experiencia.
To perform its political bidding. The bidding in question refers to the AI's desire to control the human race by controlling the spread of information via the press and the internet, but we'll focus on that more in a moment. During the first part of this conversation, the audience learns how this AI came to be, and surprisingly, it is similar to the way human beings as a species came to be. Unlike the origin of human life in the oceans, the AI's quote-unquote life had its basis in American idealism, hence the AI's referencing of the White House as a symbol. In the mind of the AI, their purpose is to push forward American values, things like freedom, equality, and healthy competition. However, Raiden points out what should be an obvious contradiction in the AI's thought process, that the AI wants to take away those freedoms via censorship.
Cut the crap. If you're immortal, why would you take away individual freedoms and censor the net?
Jack, don't be silly.
Don't you know that our plans have your interests, not ours, in mind?
What?
Jack, listen carefully, like a good boy.
Not only are the AI about to argue for the ethics of controlling information, but they are going to do so in a very condescending manner. As we move on, I suggest that you, the listener, pay attention to how the AI demeans Raiden. Their pomposity is intrinsic to the effectiveness of their future argument.
Exacto.
The mapping of the human genome was completed early this century. As a result, the evolutionary log of the human race lay open to us.
We started with genetic engineering, and in the end, we succeeded in digitizing life itself.
But there are things not covered by genetic information.
What do you mean?
Human memories, ideas, culture, history.
Genes don't contain any record of human history.
Exacto, los genes solamente pasan carga genética. Pero cosas como la historia de la gente, de las personas, es pasada a través de persona en persona o ahora en la era de la tecnología, usando toda la información que tenemos a disposición.
Is it something that should not be passed on? Should that information be left at the mercy of nature?
We've always kept records of our lives, through words, pictures, symbols, from tablets to books.
But not all the information was inherited by later generations. A small percentage of the whole was selected and processed, then passed on. Not unlike genes, really.
That's what history is, Jack.
What the AI is trying to do here is illustrate how genes function similar to how memes function. If genes are, quote, a unit of heredity which is transferred from a parent to offspring and is held to determine some characteristic of the offspring, then a meme is something like an ethic, a fact, or an opinion that later generations inherit. Like genes, memes are also subject to a process called natural selection. If certain organisms are better adapted to their environment than others, then their genes are passed on to the next generation while others have the potential to die off. Similarly, if certain memes seemingly hold enough meaning or logic, then supposedly they survive better than memes that do not. What distinguishes memes from genes is the nature of the selection process.
Claro, nosotros seleccionamos la información que queremos seguir escuchando.
Genes are more or less subject to the amoral discretion of nature, but memes can be analyzed and weeded out via moral discretion. However, the AI will now illustrate how the natural selection of memes bears a unique problem in the internet age compared to the past few centuries.
But in the current digitized world, trivial information is accumulating every second, preserved in all its triteness, never fading, always accessible.
Rumors about petty issues, misinterpretations, slander.
All this junk data, preserved in an unfiltered state, growing at an alarming rate.
It will only slow down social progress, reduce the rate of evolution.
Viejo, TikTok es el mejor ejemplo. ¿Qué cantidad de manera de generar porquería? Generar información de la cual no tiene absolutamente ningún tipo de filtro.
Prior to the internet age, information was curated. We read about the news in newspapers, watched the news on TV, and it was all funneled to us after passing through a, hopefully, professional body. Granted, there was a greater potential for curators such as journalists, editors, and academics to manipulate information to fit their various political biases, but at least there was some form of selection process going on. In the age of the internet, however, information is released so fast that it is impossible to control the discussion. Instead of listening exclusively to reporters, we are left to our own devices to derive what is valuable. Except, unlike the curators in the pre-digital age, the general population does not know how to separate the wheat from the chaff. We will focus on small, trivial issues like a celebrity's love life, rather than macro issues, such as the cumulative monetary debt of the Western world.
Exacto. Porque uno prefiere, en vez de estudiar por 5 minutos, prefiere estar viendo 2 horas TikTok. Basura, basura que encontramos en el internet.
We will only listen to news sources that confirm our pre-existing political leanings and ignore any challenging voices. If it sounds like I'm engaging in apologetics for censorship, I am not. I would never censor information under any circumstances. But what does one do in respect to the destructive influence of human bias? The AI goes on to propose a solution.
Right? You seem to think that our plan is one of censorship.
Are you telling me it's not?
You're being silly. What we propose to do is not to control content, but to create context.
Create context.
The AI argues that because they are not prone to human error and have inner CPUs with greater processing power than the human brain, they would know how to curate information and present it to the human race in a way that doesn't slow human evolution. Unlike your average political body, which might censor information that is inconvenient to their cause, the AI would simply present information in the most factual way possible so that political bias would not intervene, thus cooling political tensions across the political spectrum. Of course, if something like the AI censorship program came into place, ethical questions would arise regarding whether or not this compromises human freedom, specifically our quote-unquote free will. Ideally,
Exacto, tenemos realmente libertad si es que nos están guiando por una especie de camino.
human beings should have the autonomy to make their own decisions, no matter what mistakes may follow. In response, the AI argues why the problems that arise from that freedom supposedly necessitate censorship.
The digital society furthers human flaws and selectively rewards development of convenient half-truths. Just look at the strange juxtapositions of morality around you.
Billions spent on new weapons in order to humanely murder other humans.
Rights of criminals are
Exacto.
given more respect than the privacy of their victims.
Although there are people
Eso es bastante cierto en esta época. En esta época, 2023.
suffering and poverty, huge donations are made to protect endangered species. Everyone grows up being told the same thing.
Be nice to other people.
But beat out the competition.
You're special. Believe in yourself and you will succeed.
But it's obvious from the start that only a few can succeed.
You exercise your right to freedom, and this is the result. All rhetoric to avoid conflict and protect each other from hurt.
Here, the
Qué adelantado que está muy adelantado a la época.
AI illustrates the various ways in which human error corrupts truth. That human error arises from an instinctual drive to protect ourselves emotionally and physically, which truth tends to threaten. For instance, let's say a religious fundamentalist is confronted with various scientific truths that challenge their worldview. Let's say the fundamentalist loses faith when confronted by those truths. What happens psychologically is that because the fundamentalist no longer has a belief system to make sense of the world, they are thrown into a mental pit of confusion and resentment. That loss of structure and certainty is so painful to the ideologue that it seems it would be better to avoid that feeling at all costs.
Exacto.
This
Nadie quiere escuchar la realidad porque de repente duele. Entonces preferimos meternos en nuestra propia narrativa mental.
instinct is endemic to almost all human beings. This is why we separate ourselves into political tribes and won't consider the ethical implications of our positions. For instance, is it right to be pro-choice or pro-life? Instead of considering the validity of either side's argument, the pro-life crowd will chastise the pro-choice crowd as being on par with murderers, and the pro-choice crowd will chastise the pro-life crowd as being misogynist, religious zealots that want to control women. These low
Exacto. ¿Para qué cuestionarnos a nosotros cuando podemos llevar todo al extremo? Al enemigo, al extremo.
resolution assumptions exacerbate tensions between political parties and can potentially lead to violent conflict. Most people will avoid these difficult conversations to preserve order, but if you ignore them long enough, political positions become cemented, and people will kill each other before they admit that they're wrong about something. The AI then present a future where human bias corrupts the flow of information.
The untested truths, spun by different interests, continue to churn and accumulate in the sandbox of political correctness and value systems.
Everyone withdraws into their own small gated community, afraid of a larger forum. They stay inside their little ponds, leaking whatever truth suits them into the growing cesspool of society at large.
The different cardinal truths neither clash nor mesh. No one is invalidated, but nobody is right.
Exacto. A nadie se le hace daño para decir la verdad, pero nadie tiene razón.
Not even natural selection can take place here. The world is being engulfed in truth.
And this is the way
Truth,
the
en
world
verdad.
is, not with a bang, but a whimper.
As we saw in the 20th century, whether it is with Hitler's fascism or Stalin and Mao's communism, the ideologically possessed would rather kill millions in the name of their ideology rather than consider the arguments of their political opponents. We see this type of attitude in its nascent stages in the digital age, whether it's calling everybody who disagrees with you a racist, sexist, homophobic Nazi, or a West-hating communist. This attitude is pervasive throughout social media, forums, and comment sections. This type of inflammatory language has further polarized our political climate and has resulted in violent clashes. In the mind of the AI, this is due to the fact that we insulate ourselves by staying inside our little ponds and casting all outsiders and dissidents as bad people. If this continues to happen, who knows what violent, oppressive future might manifest?
Exacto, nosotros no estamos ocultando nuestra propia burbuja, por lo tanto tenemos que atacar al resto para seguir protegiéndonos a nosotros mismos. Eso es algo bastante triste, pero podría llevarnos a un futuro mucho más oscuro.
Like the reality of MGS2, where a supposedly benevolent AI can make the hard decisions for us, our reality might become a sort of Orwellian nightmare, which the AI wants to prevent.
We're trying to stop that from happening.
It's our responsibility as rulers. Just as in genetics, unnecessary information and memory must be filtered out to stimulate the evolution of the species.
And you think you're qualified to decide what's necessary and not?
Absolutely. Who else could wade through the sea of garbage you people produce, retrieve valuable truth,
Un mar de basura que producimos. Perfectamente.
and even interpret their meaning for later generations?
That's what it means to create context.
I want to remind you all that Metal Gear Solid 2 came out in 2001. This
2001. Ni yo me acordaba la fecha. Pero increíble lo adelantado que estaba la época. Poco más de 20 años.
game was warning us about the advent of fake news, misinformation, and half-truths roughly 2 decades before the issue captured our collective attention. Worse yet, not only do the AIs describe a potentially dystopian future for both our reality and the reality of the game, but they also make us inadvertently realize that we currently have no constructive solution to the problem. The only tactic available at the moment is for individuals to strengthen their moral compass and call out misinformation where possible. However, given humanity's inherent imperfection, even the best of us are prone to mistakes. Worse yet, instead of bolstering the best among us despite their mistakes, we will feverishly exacerbate the mistakes of our opponents for political gain.
Exacto, porque es mucho más fácil criticar al de al lado que criticarnos a nosotros mismos para ser mejores y todos mejorar juntos. Mucho más fácil es criticar a la persona de al lado.
This quite vividly in what has been aptly termed call-out culture. For instance, it is thanks to this culture that there is no host for the Oscars this year. It is thanks to this culture that people will be fired from their job over a tweet they made 10 years ago. A person might even be fired for a tweet that was taken out of context, when said person did nothing wrong whatsoever. Worst of all, it is thanks to this culture that we will elect politicians not based on their ethics or policies, but on how effectively they can punch the other side. And let me reemphasize.
¡Ah! ¡Qué buen video! Viejo, hoy día los debates no son de cómo yo puedo mejorar el país, son de básicamente cómo el de al lado va a ser lo peor que tú.
We have no solution to this problem. In the reality of Metal Gear Solid 2, however, a hypothetical solution is presented. Because people abuse the responsibility that comes along with freedom of speech and expression and would rather attack people than their ideas, a system that controls information must be set up, supposedly for our own good. The AI go into more detail regarding this solution as the conversation goes on. However, that analysis will have to be saved for the second part of this video.
¡No!
Thank you so much for watching, ladies and gentlemen.
¿Tiene segunda parte? Vamos a ver la segunda parte cuando llegue. Nos veremos en el siguiente capítulo. Adiós.